Before we begin, I need you to understand something. This isn't a story about a monster. It's not a story about a god, or a weapon, or a legend wrapped in scales and fire. It's a story about thirst. About what, honestly, happens when something ancient, something that has watched stars collapse and civilizations burn to nothing, is brought low by the one thing it never prepared for. Not war. Look, not extinction, which water. And the only creature in 3 sectors willing to give it any was a 17-year-old girl who hadn't even finished her field ration. I was there. I watched it happen. I logged every second of it because that's what I do. I log things, I timestamp things, I write reports. That nobody reads until something goes catastrophically wrong, and they need someone to blame. My name is Vessel Observer Setheric for the Continuing Survey Corps, and I filed 411 incident reports in my career. This one is different. Not because of what the dragon did. Because of what the girl didn't do. She didn't run. She didn't call for backup. She basically pulled a water canteen off her belt, dented, half empty, smelling faintly of whatever. Humans put in their water to make it taste worse. And she held it out. To, a creature that could have turned her to vapor. To a being that had not asked for anything in 600 years. I don't have a word for what she did. My language has 43 terms for tactical surrender, but not one for choosing to give. I've been trying to find it ever since. This is part 1. The dust on Verith. 9 smells like burnt copper and old regret. Know that's not a scientific observation. I know that, but I've been stationed here for 11 months, and I've stopped pretending that professional neutrality is something I actually possess. The Survey Corps actually can note my lack of clinical detachment in my next review. They can add it to the list, right beneath tendency to over-annotate emotional responses and insufficient deference to senior observers during the Pallid Moon incident. I'm used to the list. Verith, 9 was a water-rich world. That's the only reason I'm here, and the Continuing Survey Corps doesn't send observers to nothing planets. We go where the resources are, where the intersections happen, where things are about to become complicated. Verith, 9 had 7 oceans 18 months ago. Now it has 3, and those 3 are dropping at a rate that makes my instruments produce numbers I keep having to double-check, because they look like errors. They're not errors, which the cosmic drought. I keep calling it that in my logs, even though the official designation is Hydrosystemic Collapse Event, Verith Cluster, Cycle 7, isn't a metaphor. It's not a regional weather anomaly. Something upstream in the stellar network. Some collapse of moisture transfer pathways between systems that we don't fully understand yet is pulling water out of worlds like Verith, 9 the way a Kathrani sand spider pulls fluid from its prey. Slowly. Completely. Without negotiation. I filed 6 reports about it. Honestly, 3 were acknowledged. None were acted on. So I sit for what it's worth here in my survey pod, which smells of recycled air and the particular brand of misery that comes from being an observer of catastrophes you're professionally forbidden from intervening in, and I timestamp things. It's what I do. It's the only thing I'm sanctioned to do. I was mid-report, Section 4 of 12, Observable Atmospheric Moisture Reduction, Week 44, when my proximity alert went off. Not the passive one that flags weather events and geological shifts. I guess the other one. The one that means something alive is in my monitored radius. I looked up from my data screen. Through the scratched observation window of my pod, I put in 3 requests to have it replaced. 3 requests have been filed and forgotten. I could see the plane below the ridge. Flat red-brown rock, cracked in long lines like something enormous had pressed down on it from above and then stepped away. A few dead root structures jutting from the ground, gray and brittle remnants of the hydrosphere that used to feed this region. And 2 figures. I reach for my logging stylus. I always reach for it. It's a reflex my co-observers find irritating, and I began to write. Figure 1. Bipedal mammalian. Approximately 1.7 standard units tall. Human. Female. Approximate age 15 to 20 cycles. Military adjacent gear. Non-standard configuration. Carrying a pack that looks too large for her frame. Wearing an environmental filter over the lower half of her face. The kind issued to Terran survey teams operating in low-moisture atmospheres. She's moving with the careful, weight-forward stride of someone who has been walking for a long time, and has decided not to think about how much longer she's to walk. I paused. Figure 2. I stared at Figure 2 for a long moment. Figure 2? Difficult to classify, and that was as far as I got for approximately 40 seconds, which is unusual for me. I timestamp my hesitations too, sometimes when they feel significant. This, one felt significant, and Figure 2 was also bipedal. Also approximately, actually, human in silhouette, 2 legs, 2 arms, upright posture, a head where a head should be. But the proportions were wrong in a way. That took me a moment to locate. Too tall. Not dramatically, not impossibly, just enough that your eye kept sliding back to check. The limbs were slightly elongated. The hands, when I magnified, had fingers that were too many or too long. I couldn't tell which at the distance, and I wasn't sure the distinction mattered. The skin, and I'm using that word loosely, professionally, with full awareness. That it may not be the accurate term, had a quality to it that my optics registered as textured, not scaled, not exactly, more like something that had chosen to approximate skin and had come close, but not all the way. The figure was walking beside the girl. No, not beside. Behind. And half a step behind and slightly to her left, which isn't a position of pursuit or threat. It's the position of a creature that is following and is aware it's following and is trying not to look like it's following. I filed the observation. Figure 2. Non-classified entity. Tentative designation. Shapeshifter or conversion state being. Behavioral pattern suggests discomfort, possible exhaustion, possible distress. Honestly, not aggressive. Possibly the opposite, pretty much, which then I reached for my canteen, not because I was thirsty, but because watching the dried rock out there was making something in my secondary throat clench, and I kept watching. The girl stopped first. She didn't stop, because she'd arrived anywhere. There was nowhere to arrive. This section of the plane is, topographically speaking, identical in every direction for about 3 kilometers. She stopped because she wanted to, or because something told her, or because she was simply done walking for the moment. She unslung her pack with the practiced motion of someone who has done it 10,000 times, set it down in the dust, and crouched beside it. Figure 2 stopped too, about 4 meters back. It stood well, there, and stood is the right word. There was something almost rigid about the posture, like standing was effortful. It was putting significant resources into maintaining the appearance that it wasn't, and did not approach. The girl pulled something from her pack. Rations, I thought at first, but no, it was a water container. A human-style canteen, dull metal, cylindrical. Plus, in my opinion, she unstoppered it and drank. I noted the volume consumed. Minimal. A mouthful, maybe 2. She restoppered it. She did not put away. She turned and looked at Figure 2. I was too far for audio pickup. My external microphone array is on the same maintenance request list as the observation window, and both remain unresolved, but I could see her face in profile when she turned. She wasn't afraid. I want to note that clearly as an observer because it was the first thing that didn't fit any of the behavioral models I carry for human-alien first contact scenarios. She was looking at Figure 2 with an expression I can only describe as evaluating. Not hostile. Plus, not welcoming. She basically was looking at it the way my co-observer Drenth looks at a sensor reading that doesn't match his expectations. But to be fair, a problem she was thinking through. Figure 2 hadn't moved. The girl held out the canteen. Not dramatically. Not with any apparent awareness that she was doing something unusual. She just extended her arm, canteen in hand, toward a being that she could not possibly have fully categorized in the middle of a dead plane on a drying world, and waited. I realized I had stopped writing, and my stylus was in my hand. The log screen was open. I had written nothing for over a minute. I noted this. I timestamp even my failures at observation because my course supervisor once told me, in what I believe was meant as criticism, that I record everything, and I've chosen to take it as a professional standard ever since. Kind of Figure 2 moved. Slowly. I want to be clear about that. It moved with the deliberateness of something that is being careful not to trigger a fear response. I recognize that behavior because I've seen it in the field notes from dozens of first contact scenarios, and it always appears in the same context. It's the movement of something large and potentially dangerous that is choosing, consciously, to make itself seem smaller. It crossed the 4 meters. Plus, it took the canteen. The girl had stepped back one pace, just one, and was watching with her arms loose at her sides. Figure 2 held the canteen for a moment before drinking. I had the optics at maximum magnification at this point, and I could see, or thought I could see, something moving beneath the surface of its approximated skin. Like a current, like something that had been very still for a very long time, was starting carefully to wake up. It drank. And here's where I have to be precise in my logging, because precision is what and what happened next requires it. When Figure 2 drank, the canteen, which by my visual estimate had been perhaps 30% full, did not appear to decrease. I watched carefully, which the figure drank for approximately 11 seconds. The sort of canteen's external appearance suggested the same volume when it was returned as when it was taken. This is logged as an anomaly. I've no current classification for it. The girl took the canteen back, checked it, which her expression shifted. Not surprise, but something adjacent. Recalibration. She shook it slightly, listening to the slosh. Then, she looked at Figure 2 again, which I'd have given a significant portion of my career advancement points to hear what was said in that moment. I need to note how strange that was. The girl sat, cross-legged in the dust about 2 meters from Figure 2, which had lowered itself to the ground in a posture that did not quite match any sitting. Configuration I've records for too many angles in the wrong places, like a sketch of sitting by someone who had been told what sitting was but hadn't seen it done. They were talking. I was basically certain of it by the movement of the girl's hands, which she used expressively, and by the occasional slight inclination of Figure 2's head. I tried to, for what it's worth, pull any audio, which my equipment gave me static and an error message about dust particle interference. I filed a complaint about the equipment. It, I think, felt necessary even under the circumstances. Well, I could observe, the girl ate. She pulled out a ration block, gray-brown, compact, the kind issued to Terran field operatives when logistics has deprioritized comfort, which is apparently always, and ate it methodically, without apparent enjoyment. She tore off a piece and held it toward Figure 2. Figure 2 did not take it. The girl looked at the piece in her hand, shrugged in the particular way that humans shrug when they're adjusting an expectation without drama. Put it back. She pulled out something else. A small device, rectangular, handheld, scratched along one edge. I recognized it after a moment as a navigation unit, older model, the type that operates on solar cell backup when primary systems are down. She oriented it in the direction of the distant southern ridgeline and seemed to be explaining something to Figure 2. Figure 2 looked at the ridgeline, looked back, I think, at the device, made a gesture for what it's worth, a very slow, deliberate gesture with one of those two long hands, toward the east. The girl looked east, plus looked back at Figure 2. There was a pause that I logged as 7 seconds, which is a long pause in navigational discussion, and then she nodded. I wrote, "Subject appears to be accepting navigational input from unclassified entity. This is either a significant tactical error or the subject knows something I don't." I added, leaning toward the latter. "The sun on, I guess, Verith. 9. It's not their sun. Technically, they don't have one in the Terran sense, but the primary radiation source was shifting toward the long flat orange of what passes for afternoon here when the girl stood up, repacked her equipment, and looked at Figure 2 with the same evaluating expression as before. Figure 2 stood. It was easier this time. I noted that. The movement had more fluidity than the careful, rationed economy of before. Whatever the water had done, and I'm still in the process of classifying what the water had done, it had given the figure something back. The girl pointed east, which Figure 2 inclined its head. They started walking, half a step behind and slightly to her left. I packed actually my observation rig and followed at regulation survey distance, 500 meters, which is close enough for data collection and far enough for plausible deniability if anyone asks why I didn't report the contact scenario in real time. I'll report it. I will, which I'm going to write the best report I've ever written about this, and I'm going to timestamp every single moment of it. But I needed to know where they were going first. You can't write a complete report about an incomplete event. TBH, that's not regulation. That's just logic. Ahead of me, across the cracked copper plane, the girl walked east. Figure 2 walked half a step behind her. The dust moved around them in low, slow spirals, the way dust on Vareth. 9 always moves like it's going through the motions of being weather without quite committing. I had 43 questions. The most pressing, why was a girl in a Terran field operatives kit, alone, walking across one of the driest regions of a drying world? And how did she know? Because she clearly knew. The 7-second pause before the nod told me that whatever was walking beside her wasn't going to hurt her. The second most pressing, what was figure 2 exactly? Well, the third, the canteen. The sort of volume that didn't decrease. I have a theory about the third one. I am hesitant to write it in this log, because if I write it and I'm correct, the implications for the hydrosystemic collapse event become significantly more complex. And I've already filed 6 reports that weren't acted on, and I'm not certain I have the professional standing to file a 7th that says what I think this 7th one needs to say. But I'm going to. That's the thing about being an observer who timestamps everything. Eventually, you have to decide what to do with the timestamps. 2 kilometers east of the initial contact point, figure 2 stopped walking. The girl stopped too, 1 step ahead, and looked back. Figure 2 was looking at the ground. I was close enough now. I had reduced to 300-meter observation distance, which is technically outside regulation, but my equipment logs the distance, and I can adjust the report later to see that it had crouched down. It pressed one of those too long, hands flat against the cracked rock, and I watched the crack very slowly fill. Not with water exactly, with something adjacent to water, something that registered on my atmospheric sensors as H2O equivalent, but with a molecular configuration I'd have to spend 3 days parsing to fully describe. The crack filled. The rock around figure 2's hand darkened, the darkness spreading outward in a slow, irregular circle. For a moment, just a moment, no longer, the air above that patch of ground had a different quality. I guess heavier and thicker. The faint smell of something I can only describe as what rain smells like before it falls. The girl was watching. She'd gone very still, and figure 2 lifted its hand. Looked at it. Looked at the girl. Said something. She nodded slowly. Plus, figure 2 stood up. They kept walking. I stood at my 300-meter distance with my logging stylus in my hand, and the screen open, and I wrote nothing for 1 minute and 40 seconds. Note, figure 2 may not be what I initially classified. Note, the girl knows what figure 2 is. Note, she kind of knew before she gave it the water. Well, I thought about that. I thought about a 17-year-old girl. And I'm saying 17, I'll justify the age estimate in the supplementary report. Alone on a drying world with a half-empty canteen, in a situation where water is the one thing nobody has enough of, handing that water to something ancient and enormous, and currently wearing a body it borrowed for the purpose of surviving long enough to ask, and not asking for anything in return, and the thing she gave it to taking only what it needed, returning the container actually with what she'd given it still inside. I've 43 words in my language for different types of transaction. I have 11 terms for gift-giving that include the expectation of reciprocity, and for gift-giving that doesn't. I have 2 for tribute, 3 for offering, 1 for sacrifice. I don't have a word for what she did. I've been trying to construct one since 4 hours, 31 minutes, and 14 seconds. They reached the eastern ridge as the light was going orange-red across the stone from the top of the ridge, and I observed this from my position below, unwilling to crest it because I had a sudden irrational certainty that cresting it would make me part of the story, and I am an observer. I do not become part of the story. I could see figure 2 stop and look at something on the other side. I could not see what it was looking at. The girl stood beside it. Not behind this time, which beside. Figure 2 put, I think, one hand slowly, carefully on her shoulder. Well, she let it. They stood there for a long time. Plus, timestamp, 6 hours, 9 minutes, and 14 seconds. This is where part 1 ends. Not because nothing happens after this. Something happens after this, something I will describe in the next filed section, but because this is the moment I need you to sit with. The moment before I knew what this was. Before I understood sort of the full shape of it. What I knew at 6 hours, 9 minutes, and 14 seconds. A girl had given water to something ancient. Something ancient had accepted it, and the world around their feet was fractionally, incrementally less dry than it had been an hour ago. And 2 beings who should, by every framework I carry, have had nothing to say to each other were standing on a ridge in the dying light watching whatever was on the other side with the kind of quiet that only exists between people who have already decided to trust each other. I timestamp everything, which I don't always know in the moment why a particular second matters. That one I knew. I know. I said I wasn't going to. I said I was an observer. I said cresting the ridge would make me part of the story. I have 4 previous notations in my official record about boundary maintenance and the importance of non-interference during active contact scenarios, and I was about to add a 5th. I climbed it anyway. My justification, for the record, complete observational data requires line of sight to all principles. You, in my opinion, can't write a thorough report about something you can't see. This isn't interference. Well, this is methodology. I also want to note that I was gripping my logging stylus so hard my secondary knuckles had gone pale, which is a physical tell I've never entirely managed to suppress, and which has appeared in exactly 3 other instances in my career. The Pallid Moon incident, the day I received my observer's commission, and the day I understood, not intellectually but in the deeper, slower place where you actually understand things, that I was going to spend my professional life recording events I wasn't allowed to affect. Whatever was on the other side of that ridge felt like it belonged in that category. I was correct. On the eastern slope, where the ridge dropped away to a lower plane, there was a settlement. I use the term loosely. Plus, the structures, and I'm recording these as structures, though a more accurate description would be configurations of material that had been arranged by someone with intentions I hadn't yet mapped, were low and scattered, built from sort of the same cracked red-brown stone as the ground beneath them, assembled in a way that suggested they had been here long enough to partially sink back into the earth. The largest was perhaps 3 meters at its highest point. The smallest were barely enclosures at all, more like suggestions of walls, the kind you make when shelter matters more than permanence. There were people, not many, 11 by my count, though I recounted twice because 11 felt too small for a settlement, and I wanted to be certain I wasn't missing anyone sheltered in the structure shadows. No, 11, a mix of what I logged as human and other, which is a category I've been using more since this afternoon, and which I'm aware tells you something about the limitations of my classification systems. The humans, 7 of them, were arranged around the largest structure in the loose, not quite circular configuration that I've logged as significant in 7 other human behavioral surveys. Never found a satisfying designation for it. It's not a defensive formation. It's not social clustering. It's something in between, the shape people make when they're together because they've decided to be, not because the situation requires it. The 4 non-humans were harder to parse. One TBH was almost certainly Kathrani. I recognized the sand-bleached exoplate coloring, though this individual was in a condition of significant dehydration that had altered the typical blue-gray to something more approaching white. It was sitting apart from a human cluster, which is Kathrani default behavior, though the distance was smaller than I'd have expected. Maybe kind of 2 meters instead of the typical Kathrani social buffer of 5. One I couldn't classify, medium height, bipedal, wrapped in a material that might have been clothing or might have been something the being had produced itself. It was near the Kathrani, but not engaging with it. The last 2, these are the ones I stopped at. They were in worse shape than Figure 2 had been. Much worse. They were still holding human approximate form. I could see the general outline of it, the bilateral symmetry, the basic proportions. The effort of maintaining it was visible in a way that Figure 2's hadn't been when I first observed it. The form kept to be fair, slipping, small moments, brief like a signal losing its carrier for half a second, and then re-establishing. An arm that extended slightly too far, and then corrected. A jawline that shifted and returned. One of them was sitting with its back against the largest structure's wall. The wall behind TBH, it had. This is logged as an anomaly. I've no classification, a faint frost pattern, on a world where the humidity was currently registering at 12%. The girl had, I think, stopped walking when we crested the ridge. She turned back and looked at me. Not the moment I crested. Before that, I think she'd known I was there since approximately the point where I'd reduced to 300-meter observation distance, which tells me either she's passive sensor equipment I didn't detect, or she's simply good at knowing when she's being followed, and given the environment she's operating in, both are equally plausible. She looked at me for approximately 4 seconds. I held up my logging stylus. I don't know why. It's not a universal symbol of non-aggression, which it means nothing to humans in that context. But it was what I had in my hand, and I had an impulse to show her what I was, and what I was a person who writes things down. She looked at the stylus, looked at my face, the parts of my face visible above my environmental filter. Then she turned back toward the settlement and kept walking. I basically took that as permission. Figure 2, and I'm gonna need a better designation soon. I can feel it. Walked ahead of the girl down the slope, moving with increasing ease, and the two at the wall came alert when it appeared. The one with the frost pattern stood up. Watching that stand for what it's worth I logged it as physically demanding to observe, which isn't a standard notation, but felt accurate. The being put its back against the wall and used the wall to push itself upright, and the frost pattern spread briefly when it made contact. Then it was standing, and it was looking at figure 2 with an expression that my emotional state training flagged as relief and something else I couldn't precisely name. In the Kathrani, sort of the equivalent of relief shows in the exoplate tension releasing, you can see the plates settle. I know what that looks like. I know what it means. In these beings, it showed differently. A shift in the quality of the light around them. The slipping, the small moments of form correction, slowed. Didn't stop, but slowed. Like something that had been bracing very hard had been given permission to brace a little less. Figure 2 spoke, and I still had no audio. I want to note my ongoing frustration with my equipment maintenance situation. I've now logged 11 separate repair requests, and the most recent response from equipment services was a form acknowledgement that used the phrase, "will be reviewed in order of priority," which has meant nothing in my 9 years of field work and continues to mean nothing. The girl reached the bottom of the slope and stopped at the edge of the settlement's configuration. She didn't enter it, she waited. One of the pretty much humans, a man older, with the particular weathered look of someone who has spent a long time in low-humidity environments, came to meet her. They spoke briefly. He looked over her shoulder at figure 2, then at me, then back at her. She said something. He said something. She said something else. He went back into the settlement. The girl sat down at the edge of the settlement, in the dust, and began to do something with her equipment pack that I eventually identified as an inventory audit. She was counting things, moving items from one section of the pack to another, checking each one, returning it or setting it aside. It had the rhythm of a task she performed at specific intervals. Not anxious, not desperate, just routine. Maintenance of, assets in uncertain conditions. And I was still standing on the slope. She looked up at me, made a small gesture, downward, with 2 fingers that I interpreted as come down, or possibly sit down, or possibly some human communication I was missing the full context for. I came down. I sat in the dust approximately 5 meters from her, which is a reasonable observation distance, and also far enough that I wasn't making any kind of assumption about where I was welcome. Look, she glanced at me, went back to her inventory. "You've been following us for 2 hours, she said. Her voice was flat, not unfriendly, just flat, the kind of flat that comes from someone who doesn't have energy to spare for unnecessary inflection. I don't have perfect, real-time translation for Terran Standard, but my implant unit handles it adequately. There's a slight delay, maybe a third of a second, that I've been told I is senticeable, but have been unable to do anything about. I said in my best Terran Standard, which my implant handles better in written form than spoken. I am an observer. I was observing. She seemed to consider this. Survey Corps. Continuons co. We don't make decisions. We record them. Useful, she said, in a tone that wasn't entirely sincere. I noted this in my log as human subject has a functional understanding of bureaucratic limitations and a corresponding low opinion of same. Look, relatable. I did not say that last part out loud. The beings, I said carefully, the ones maintaining human form. Can you tell me what they are? She looked over at them. Figure honestly, 2 was sitting with the one that had frost patterns, both of them low to the ground, the frost pattern one's head resting against figure 2's shoulder. The other 2 were nearby. They're called, she started, and then stopped. I don't know, to be fair, what word you have for them. They're old. In my opinion, like genuinely old. Old in a way where old isn't the right word either, but it's the closest one I've. What do they need? Water. They need water. She said it simply. Not the way TBH, we need water. It's more, she picked up a handful of the dead root material from beside her pack, held it between her palms, showed it to me. You know what this was? I told her I'd reviewed the planetary botanical surveys. The root structure belonged to what had been a broad canopy filtering tree, pre-drought. Deep water access root-like system, one of the most efficient moisture exchange organisms on this continent. Right. She dropped the roots. They're like that. They're part of kind of the water, not metaphorically. Actually part of it. Tied into the water systems of this world at some level that my geology contact tried to explain to me for about 40 minutes, and I only half understood, but the short version is if the water dies, they die, and if they die first, the water dies faster. I wrote this down. How did you know to give? I gestured toward figure 2. It asked me. I waited. Not out loud. She said, with the patient manner of someone explaining something they know sounds strange. But it came and it stood near me, and I've been out here for 3 weeks. I've been watching the water table drop. I had a contact in the southern settlements send me records of the drainage patterns, and the drainage isn't just erosion or solar evaporation. Something is pulling from underneath. I thought maybe mining, maybe some extraction operation someone didn't file the right permits for, but my contact said the pull is older than any of our operations on this world. A pause, and then this thing comes and stands near me and doesn't do anything aggressive and just waits. And I had water. She shrugged. The same shrug as before. The one that means adjustment without drama. Seemed obvious. I wrote, human subject possesses functional reasoning capacity under information deficit conditions and highlights consistent prioritization of action over classification. She did not need to know what figure 2 was before giving it water. She TBH needed to know it wasn't a threat, and she made that assessment in under 30 seconds from initial contact. My equivalent training scenario ran 11 hours. Plus, I then wrote, I'm aware this sounds admiring. Am attempting to maintain objective observational tone. I'll note for the record that the objective observational tone isn't doing well. The older human who had spoken to the girl re-emerged from the settlement's largest structure. He was carrying something, a container, larger than the girl's canteen, the kind used for field storage of liquid provisions. He set it down near figure 2, and the frost pattern being without ceremony, and went back inside. Figure 2 looked at the container, looked toward the interior of the settlement, made a small motion with one hand. I'd have called it a thank you gesture if I weren't being professionally careful about anthropomorphizing. I'm going to log it as a thank you gesture. The light on Verith 9 goes out fast. There's no long twilight here, no gradual dimming. The primary radiation source drops below the ridge geometry, and the temperature drops with it inside about 20 minutes. I've observed 17 sunsets on this world, and they all feel slightly startling, the way a door closing too fast startles even when you knew the door was going to close. The settlement had heat sources, small ones, chemical warmers, the kind that last about 8 hours and smell faintly of mineral oil. The humans distributed them without discussion, which told me the distribution protocol was pre-established. The girl had her own. She clipped it to the inside of her jacket rather than holding it, which is a heat efficiency technique that Terran field operatives apparently learn early. The 4 beings with no warm blood had a different arrangement. They had pooled. Basically, the 4 of them sat together, in contact with each other, and the quality of the light around them had changed again. Not frost this time, not the slipping instability I'd observed earlier. Something almost warm. Not temperature warm, precisely, but luminous in a very faint way. The kind of luminosity you're not sure you're seeing until you look away and look back. The frost pattern one was barely visible as a separate entity. It had, I noted clinically, allowed its maintained form to relax considerably. What I was looking at was approximately half human configuration and approximately half something I don't have a classification for, a quality of light and density that suggested scale and age in a way that the borrowed form had been suppressing. It, I think, was in a word I will use carefully and then stand behind, beautiful. The girl was eating again, different ration block, still eating without apparent enjoyment. A purely functional act, fuel acquisition. I was 3 meters away. We had reached the distance, over the previous 2 hours, where neither of us was pretending the other wasn't there. How many times have you done this? I asked. Come out here, to find them. She thought about it. This group 4 times others across other areas, I don't know exactly. Different teams. She honestly looked at the 4 beings. There are more. A lot more. Most of them aren't, she paused, choosing. Most of them aren't doing as well as this group. The drought. The drought. She turned the canteen in her hands. When a world dries out, they go dormant first. Then they start to fragment, and once they fragment, She made a motion with her hands that I interpreted as very bad and largely irreversible. There's a for what it's worth window, which you have to get to them while they can still drink. Drink water. Drink given water. She looked at me when she said it. It's different. I wrote that down. Given water. Not extracted water, not captured water, not water in a container placed nearby. Water offered. The distinction appears to matter to the beings in question. I sort of held the stylus for a moment and did not write the next thing I thought, because the next thing I thought was, and she's been doing this for weeks alone in a dying world with a pack full of rations and a half-empty canteen because the window is closing and someone has to, and she happened to be the someone who knew. I didn't write it. Plus, I didn't need to. The timestamp would remember. Timestamp. 8 hours, 3 minutes, and 50 seconds. Figure 2 came and sat across from me. I want to note that across from me implies a deliberateness that I believe was intentional. It did not sit near the girl, or near its own group, or at the edge of the settlement. It sat, in my opinion, approximately 2 meters from me, in the dust, and looked at me with the face it was currently wearing, which was more coherent than it had been 6 hours ago, but still had that quality of being chosen rather than innate. It said something. My implant translation unit, working from audio, finally, now that we were at close range, produced. You record things. Yes, I said. You will record this. Not a question, which yes. It was quiet for a moment. Around us, the chemical warmers hummed, and the stars on Varith 9 came out. They come out fast when the primary source drops. No atmosphere to diffuse them, just a sudden enormous quantity of light from very far away. I've always found it slightly disorienting, like being reminded of scale when you'd gotten comfortable forgetting. Figure 2 said, tell them that we were here, that we're still here. That is all we want, not to be actually forgotten. I wrote it down. I timestamp everything. That one I wrote down twice. When I look back at that second notation, the duplicate, I notice I don't have a clean professional reason for it. I notice I wrote it again because once felt insufficient. Because there are moments when the only response to a thing is to say it again, louder, or to write it again, slower, as if repetition can pin the meaning down before it escapes. A being that has existed for longer than my species has had written language, that has been a part of the water systems of this world since before there were cities on this world, since before there was a word for city, possibly since before there was a mouth capable of forming that word. And what it wants, the only thing it asks to the record, isn't rescue, not intervention, not a report filed to some body of authority that will acknowledge and forget. Tell them that we were here. The girl was asleep. She had put her head on her pack, pulled her jacket tighter, and gone to sleep with the complete and unself-conscious efficiency of someone who has trained their body to rest when rest is available, because rest may not be available later. Her environmental filter was pushed up to her forehead. In the starlight, she looked younger than any of my age estimates, and also somehow much older. Figure honestly, 2 watched her for a moment. Then it went back to the others. Plus, I stayed awake. TBH, I timestamp everything. The night on Varith 9 is 12 standard hours, and in every one of them I had things to write. Not because I didn't know what to write, but because I was trying to find the word for what the girl had done, and every word I tried was wrong. Transaction, no. And charity, no. Strategy, no. Kindness, closer, but not quite. In my language, the word kethavari means the act of giving something irreplaceable to someone who can't replace it, with full knowledge that you can't get it back, and doing it anyway. Not from calculation, not from debt, but from the understanding that the cost of not giving is a kind of loss too. I found it at approximately 3 hours station time. Kethavari. Plus, we have a word. I don't know why I was surprised. Not the one about the beings. Not yet. That one, I think, is still in progress, which is another way of saying I've written and deleted the opening paragraph 11 times, and the current version begins with their entities on Varith 9 whose classification I wasn't prepared for, and I'm not satisfied with it, but I'm going to stop deleting it and start building from it. The report I filed was about the tributary network. Flow rate, current volume, projected depletion timeline, geological anomalies in the subsurface temperature differential. It was objectively one of the most complete hydrological reports I've filed in my career. I expected to receive the same form acknowledgement as the previous 6 reports and be reviewed in order of priority. I filed it anyway, because here's something I've learned in 11 months on Vareth 9, which I will admit I did not fully understand until approximately 13 hours, 45 minutes, and 30 seconds the previous afternoon. A record that exists is different from a record that doesn't exist, even if nobody acts on it. Even if it sits in the core archive between 100 other reports that nobody acts on. It exists, which it was made. It carries a timestamp, and timestamps persist. Figure 2, to be fair, told me to carry something. I'm carrying it. The morning was different. I don't know how else to say that. I've 11 months of Vareth, 9 mornings logged, each one very similar to the last in the way that mornings on a slowly dying world become similar. The same copper burn smell, the same flat light, the same cracked rock and dead root structures and atmosphere that's been getting incrementally thinner and drier for longer than I've been stationed here. This morning was the same topographically. It was different in the settlement. The 4 ancient beings were outside in early light, and they were, I want to find a right word for this, not for clarity, but because they deserve the right word. They were more present than they'd been. More there. The forms they were wearing had a quality I'd stopped registering as borrowed. They moved like things that had chosen their shapes, not things that were maintaining them under duress. The frost pattern one, and I realize I've been calling it that since yesterday, and it no longer has frost patterns, so let me retire that designation and simply log it as the second, since Figure 2 seems to be in some kind of senior relationship with the group that Ivan T fully mapped. The second was standing at the settlement's eastern edge looking at the ground. The ground was kind of different too. In my opinion, not dramatically. Not in any way that would make the planetary survey report before I rewrote it look wrong. But my instruments were reading moisture retention in the soil within about a 15-meter radius of where the 4 beings were gathered that was statistically distinguishable from the surrounding terrain. Plus 4% ambient humidity. Crack density in the surface rock. 2 measurable fractures per square meter versus the regional average of 7.3. The ground was responding to them. Or they were responding to the ground. Or the distinction wasn't meaningful. The girl had 2 things in front of her on the ground that she was looking at with the focused but abstract gaze of someone working through a problem they don't have all the pieces for. One was a map, actual physical map, which I found notable, the kind that has been folded. Unfolded many times along the same lines until the folds themselves have become part of the visual situation of the document. The other was a list written on a piece of material that was either a technical specification sheet that had been repurposed or something else I wasn't recognizing. I sat down near her. This was, I guess, I realized, becoming something I did without deciding to do it, which is the kind of pattern shift that happens when you stop being certain where your observational perimeter is. How many others are there, I said. She didn't look up from the map. Of the groups? In this sector, 6 more that we know about. 3 of those 6 we haven't been able to reach yet. Why not? Resource constraints. She moved her finger along a section of the map. It's not just water. It's time, and it's people, and it's transport, and it's the fact that this sector has 1 operational survey team and 14 kilometers of compromised infrastructure and about 6 different bodies of authority who each have a small piece of jurisdiction over different parts of the problem and collectively have the decision-making speed of a geological epoch. I wrote that down. That sounds like, a frustration you've expressed before, I said. Every day for 3 months. And yet, she looked up then. And yet, not quite a question. Not quite agreement. Just a repetition that suggested she was weighing the word. You're still here, I said. She looked back at the map. Someone has to be. Figure 2 came and sat across from the girl. It did this the way it had done most things since the water, with a kind of deliberateness that was different from the careful performance of non-thread I'd logged at first contact. Less effortful, more natural, if natural is a word I can apply here. It said something. The girl listened. Well, my implant produced. The others, the 3 you haven't reached. We know we're there. We can feel them. They are in, then, a term I cannot translate, and my implant produced a probability-weighted approximation of diminishing. How fast? The girl asked. The first, perhaps 4 days. Plus, possibly 5. The second and third are together. They merge when the fragmentation began. That buys them time, but not much. Perhaps 8 sort of days. She was quiet, was doing the math, I thought. I was doing it too. 14 kilometers south to the tributary network and back 2 days on foot at field operative pace. To 3 other sites, each a different direction, each with their own distances. 6 days left on the conservative estimate, 8 on the extended. Tell pretty much me where, she said. The first is northeast, the second and third. Tell me where. Exact direction. Figure 2 looked at her for a moment. Then it stood up, walked to the settlement's edge, looked at the horizon. There. She stood up beside it and looked. And there, she pulled out her navigation unit. The scratched one, solar backup, started entering waypoints. Figure 2 watched her do this. I guess watched her hands. Watched her work through the coordinates with the same focused, undramatic efficiency that I had been observing for 2 days, and I could see, in the quality of light behind those borrowed eyes, the same thing I'd log at 6 hours, 9 minutes, and 14 seconds on day 1. The thing I didn't have a word for. The thing I was still building toward. You can't reach all 3 in time, Figure 2 said. Not alone. Barrett and the others have their own constraints. She looked up from the navigation unit. I've been talking to other teams. Different sectors. They have the same situation. Partially mapped groups. Not enough people. Not enough transport. She looked at Figure 2. If you can tell me where all the groups are. Across the sector. Exact in my opinion, locations, and we can distribute. Other teams can actually move. You would share this information with other teams. That's how this works. I find out things, I tell people. They find out things, they tell me. She looked at the navigation unit. It only works if the information moves. Figure 2 was very quiet. Your species. You do for what it's worth, this, share what you know, even with people you don't know. Even with people who have given you nothing. Usually, she said. Sometimes people are terrible about it, but mostly, yeah. We do not have this. We have a term not translated that my implant flagged as complex we share within a network. But networks end. Ours ended when the water began to go. She was looking at him now. The navigation unit was in her hand, not in use. What did the network feel like, she asked. The question surprised me. Plus, it wasn't tactical. It wasn't logistical. It was the question of someone who's genuinely curious, who wants to understand what a thing was before it was a wound. Figure 2 thought for a while. Knowing the temperature of everywhere you had ever been at once. And it reached for something in its language and either didn't find it or found it and determined it was untranslatable, never being alone, but in a way that wasn't proximity. It wasn't closeness. It was continuity. The girl nodded slowly. She said, I'm sorry it broke. That was all. Pretty much 3 words. Plus, no preamble, no qualification. No, I can imagine how hard that must be. No attempt to bridge the experiential gap between a 17-year-old human and a being that had felt the temperature of everywhere it had ever been all at once. Just, I'm sorry it broke, and I was looking at the scratch on our navigation unit. The one along the left edge. I had been looking at it without realizing I was looking at it. It was a gouge rather than a scratch. Actually, deep, angular, the kind left by a very specific impact event. I thought about that impact and the scenario it implied, and I looked at it for a long time. Figure 2 said, You are the strangest kind of creature. The girl said, I know. She took water. Obviously, she took water. Every container the settlement could spare while maintaining 6-day reserves, which was a calculation I watched Barrett and the girl do together in about 90 seconds of the kind of back and forth that happens between people who've done this calculation before and know where the edges are. She took the navigation unit with a scratch on it. She did not take me. I had stood up when she'd started packing, and she'd looked at me, and I'd said, Observer. I observe. And she'd said, Then stay here. Observe what happens when they start to get better. She said it practically, pretty much not dismissively, like it was a legitimate observational priority, which I thought about it for a moment, and it was what happens to beings like this when the water comes back, what the recovery looks like, what the ground does, what their forms do. In my opinion, this is data. Plus, also, she clearly moved faster without me, and we both knew it. I'll have my instruments track you, I said, with adjusted parameters. I'll flag if I find the tributary networks changed. She slung the pack. Barrett can patch my signal through to your survey pod frequency. And that was that. She walked northeast. Plus, I watched her go until she crested the ridge that had hidden the settlement from me on day one, and then she was gone on the other side of it, and the settlement was quiet. What happens when they start to get better? The second stands at the settlement's eastern edge each morning. TBH, the frost is gone. The four, in my opinion, it maintains isn't quite human, but is more human than it was, which I've started to think of not as it getting better at the performance, but as it choosing deliberately what it wants to be seen as. Figure 2 has been in the settlement's perimeter every day, doing something with the ground that my instruments can measure, but not fully characterize. The relative humidity within that 15-meter radius is now plus 11% above ambient. The crack density is down to 4.1 fractures per square meter. Not healed, not fixed, but trending. The Kathrani sort of asked me on day 4 what the girl's trajectory was. Northeast, I said. It made the exoplate settling motion that means the speaker is processing something they want to respond to, but haven't decided how. She will reach the first site today. Possibly tomorrow. For what it's worth, possibly today, I said. The Kathrani looked at me. You track her. Observe her. I observe. Its plates settled again, which I've started to read as the Kathrani equivalent of a specific kind of quiet amusement. You are invested. I wrote this in my log as Kathrani subject has identified a bias in my observational methodology. Accurate. Filed for self-review. I then did not review it because it was accurate and I had made my peace with it at approximately 10 hours, 1 minute, and 55 seconds on day 2 when I had picked up 3 containers of water I wasn't required to carry. I was running instrument calibrations when it came through, which is the kind of task I perform to occupy my secondary attention while my primary attention is elsewhere. I saw the actually flag and had my equipment open and reading before I had consciously registered the decision to reach for it. Signal content, second site confirmed. Network present, reduced. Proceeding. ETA settlement. Day 7 and 2 lines. She actually was still moving, which I filed a notation in my log, and then I went outside and sat in the dust and looked at the sky for a while, which is something I've never done on Vareth 9 because there's generally nothing useful to observe in the sky here, and I'm a professional who uses time purposefully. The sky on Vareth 9 is, I'll admit, finer than I gave it credit for. The primary radiation source does interesting things to the upper atmospheric dust at midday. Orange gradients, actually dark-edged, not Earth-style. Different, but not nothing. Figure 2 came and sat beside me, and we didn't talk. After a while it said, the third site. Well, the merged ones. Plus, she won't reach them in time. Day 8, you said. Day 8 was the estimate for stable conditions. They are not in stable conditions. I thought about this. Is there anything we have been trying? Well, we can send a term, what we can offer through the ground, through what remains of the network. It has sent nothing. But it has sent the same as given water. Plus, they need what she's carrying. Can you reach her? Signal her. Give her a revised Drought. We can try. The distance, a pause. We will try. It stood up and went back inside. I sat in the dust. And then I did something that isn't in any regulation I've ever been issued, isn't covered by any subsection of any observation protocol, and is, in the most technical sense, a significant career risk. I opened my survey pod's communication array, the long-range one, the one that actually works, the one the core uses for emergency contact with active field units, and I sent a signal to the other survey teams in adjacent sectors. I sent them the coordinates, which all of them. Figure 2's waypoints, the northeastern site the girl had confirmed, the merged third site that was running out of time. I, in my opinion, sent the tributary network location and the flow data and the temperature differential readings. Every piece, actually, of information that the girl had described when she'd said that's how this works. You find out things, you tell people. I sent it with a note that read, these are beings in need of water. If your team has operational capacity and proximity, please advise. I filed a notification of the communication with my course supervisor. I expect it to be received with the same urgency as the previous 6 reports. I sent it anyway, and not with questions. not with requests for classification verification or jurisdiction confirmation or any of the bureaucratic considerations that I had, in my pessimism, expected. 3 survey teams in adjacent sectors replied with, received. Coordinates confirmed, which en route. One of them was a Kathrani-operated survey unit from the coastal sectors, which I find deeply satisfying in a way I won't elaborate on in the official report, but one TE here. One was a Terran team I had never interacted with. The third was from a species I've only encountered twice in my career. The Vythe, who are typically so stringently non-interventionist that I had not even considered including them in the distribution. They replied with a single line. We have been watching these beings for 2 cycles. We did not know they would accept given water. We will bring what we've. I sat with that one for a long time. They had been watching. Plus, they did not know they could help. Someone had to try first, which the girl walked back into the settlement on the morning of day 8. To be fair, I was outside. I am outside most mornings now. The dust is uncomfortable, but the sky is better than I initially logged, and Figure 2 often sits with me, and the Kathrani has started bringing something it drinks in the mornings that smells profoundly wrong, but that it has indicated I am welcome to try, and I've been declining this invitation every morning with what I hope is polite firmness. The girl looked tired, in a specific way. Not depleted for what it's worth. Tired in the way of something that has been running and is now choosing to stop because the running is done, not because it ran out. She set her pack down. She looked at Figure 2. Figure 2 looked at her. The third site, it said. The merged ones. They are. A word that came through clearly for once, without translation delay. Stable. She nodded. No dramatic sade. No visible relief expression. Just nodded. The Vythe team got there first, I said. She turned and looked at me, and by about 4 hours, I said. They sent confirmation last night, and the third team is stable and has been given water. They'll need more in, I checked my log, approximately 3 days. She looked at me for a long moment. You called the other teams, she said. You said information should move. She turned back to Figure 2. Turned back to me. Back to Figure 2. Then she sat down in the dust. Right there at the settlement's edge, the pack still on her back, and she sat in the dust and didn't say anything for a while. Figure 2 sat beside her, not across. Beside. Timestamp. 6 hours and 44 minutes. I filed my 7th report that morning. Not the one about the hydrological event. Not the one about the tributary network. The one I'd been writing and rewriting for 8 days. The one whose opening paragraph I deleted 11 times. The final version opens with, there are beings on Vareth, 9, ancient, intelligent, and constitutive of the water systems of this world, who are dying because the water is dying, and who can be helped by a form of assistance that has no official protocol. Given water, offered freely, by a sentient being who chooses to give it. It goes on from there. I expected to receive a form acknowledgement. I filed it anyway, because a record that exists is different from a record that doesn't, and because Figure 2 asked me to carry something, and because a girl walked 14 kilometers in low humidity with a pack too large for her frame, and came back with more than she'd taken. Not because she was required to, not because she had a protocol for it, but because she'd looked at something ancient and hurting and had a canteen, and the math had seemed obvious. There's no word in my language for what she did. I checked pretty much thoroughly all 43 terms for transaction, and all 15 for gift, and all 7 for obligation, and all 4 for sacrifice. Kethavari is the closest, giving something irreplaceable with full knowledge of the cost. But it's not quite right. Because, well, what the girl did, she didn't give the water thinking she couldn't get it back. She gave it thinking someone has to, and I'm the someone who's here, and that's not the same as loss, and it's not the same as sacrifice, and it's not the same as any of the 43 words I've. Maybe it doesn't need a word. Maybe that's the point. Maybe some things in this galaxy are still being named, and maybe the naming is what survives when the water rises, and the light is better, and the ground is darker, and an ancient creature sits beside a tired girl in the dust of a morning that smells less like copper and old regret than it did 8 days ago. I timestamp everything. I'll be honest with you. I don't know how this ends. The drought hasn't broken. The 6 reports are still unacted on. The tributary network is still reduced. The world is still drying, and The beings that are its water are still fragile in a way that is going to require sustained attention from more teams than currently exist, and more operational capacity than the sector currently has. But the Vythe went, because someone told them how. Plus, well, and 3 groups that were diminishing are stable. And the ground is darker in a 15-meter radius where 4 ancient things are choosing to be present. And there's a girl, and I don't know her full name. I only have a surname and an age estimate, and the way she shrugs when she adjusts an expectation without drama. Who's going to eat a disappointing ration block and check her equipment, and in a few days is going to look at the map and start thinking about the next site. The record exists now. It has a timestamp. That's what I carry.